Today's daf is Zayin, and we pick up with the very first line on daf Zayin Amud Aleph. Look at that. Rabbi Omer. So we are continuing the discussion of what you can do on Chol Moed relating to fields and whether it is a davar ha'avad or not. So there's going to be an actual loss, and we have the position of Rabbi Yehuda in the. I'm sorry. So yes, so we had recently just read the Mishnah, not about actually working the fields, but about trapping animals, moles and weasels and rats and so on, which on, again, Shvius, it's hard to understand exactly what the problem is because you're not working the land, but on Chol Moed, you're still doing work, you're still doing labor, and again, the question is, is this Lamates Malachos, or is this, as the Gemara has been framing it, more in terms of Tircha, but obviously it's a much broader category. So now we have the position of Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah that said you can capture lay traps and capture these animals. Let's take a look. Rabbi Yehuda Omer misteh ha'ilan kedarko, in a normal way in an orchard. Misteh halavan, but in a wheat field, shelo kedarko, you cannot do it in the normal way because presumably it's not that much of a hesed. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Ketzad kedarko, what's a normal way of capturing these animals, laying traps for these animals? Chofer guma v'tola b'mitzuda. You make a hole and you put the trap in the hole. Ketzad shelo kedarko, what's the not normal way of doing it? Noit shvud umake b'kordam, you put in a spike and you bang it with a hammer. Umiradeh, or some have umiradeid ha'adama mitachteha. So you either pound down the land underneath it, or I think it could mean that you cause tremors in the earth around it, and the tremors scare away the animals, scare away the subterranean pests. Tanya we taught in a brisa. Either Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov or Reb Shimon Lezer Omer Keshamu misadeh lavan shelo kedarko. When they said in a wheat field you had to do it in a not normal way. Lo amru ela b'stei lavan atzmucha li'ir. That's only one that is near the city. So presumably if it's near to the city, I don't know, there's fewer of these animals, and certainly there's not other types of concerns that if the animals are in the wheat field, they'll go somewhere else. Aval b'stei lavan atzmucha lisadeh ilan. But if it is a wheat field near an orchard, afilu kedarko, you can do it the normal way. Shema yetu mistei halavan v'yachrivu telanot, and this makes it clear why the orchard is a bigger concern. The phrase v'yachrivu, they'll destroy the trees. So these are things which really would be destructive if they got into a orchard. So therefore, if there's a wheat field that is near an orchard, you can do what you need to do in the wheat field. Okay, so that's that. Umakrinas appear to be moed. You can also wall a breach in the wall. You can fill in a breach in the wall on Chol Moed. And then the end of the mission is Shvius Bona Kedarko, build a normal way on Shemitah. And again, question is what's even the Chiddush by Shemitah, since you're not working the land at all, you're just making a fence around the land. That we'll see in the Gemara. But let's first look at the filling of the breach on Chol Moed. Ketzad makrin, how do you fill in the wall of the breach? So Rav Yosef Amar behutza v'dafna, in like twigs and reeds, some type of a temporary filler. B'masni satan, in a Braita we taught you could do something even more. Tsar b'tzror, you can actually put rocks into that breach in the wall or in the fence. Ve'enotach petit, you can lay the bricks, but don't plaster it over. So you don't make it permanent, but you could certainly make it more sturdy. All right, and again, one can imagine, as the Gemara is going to get to, that there are multiple reasons you would be doing this. The most obvious in this context is to protect the field from having animals, maybe even people, but animals go through it, rabbits and other types of things, and eat the produce or trample it and so on. But in a different context, when you're not dealing with a field but a yard, there could be issues of privacy as well. And the Gemara now turns its attention to that. So let's take a look. Amar Rav Chisda, lo shanu la kotel hagina. That's only a wall of a garden, like a vegetable garden. So you want to keep out the rabbits. Aval kotel hachatzer. But you know how I know that rabbits eat from vegetable gardens? Because I read Peter Rabbit as a kid. This is my degree of knowledge of the facts that we're talking about. All right, aval kotel hachatzer boneh kedarko. But if you've got a wall around your yard, your backyard, that you can rebuild the normal way. Now, why? You might say, oh, there's no vegetables, there's no food for it to. It's not going to destroy. They're not going to be destroying any of the produce. So the most obvious thing that would occur to me would be the issue of privacy. And anybody knows at the beginning of Bava Basra, whole discussions about walls and the rights of privacy and so on. But the Rabbi Gershom here says, about 8 lines down in the narrow lines, Bone kedarko, the ika pseida yisere, i'ayal be ganve, the ganvi mamone. So there you're afraid of just protecting the house from possible robbers. So that's the protection. I'll get back to that in a minute. So it's around the yard, you can do it the normal way. Okay. Let's try to bring a proof to this, that our mission is only talking about a garden, but if you're talking about your own like front yard or backyard, you can even do it from the outset. So kotel hachatzer bona kedarko. I'm sorry, did I skip a line? I skipped a line. Where am I? Kotel hagochel l'reshut harabim. We have a breita, so sefta, that says if you have a wall that is leaning over into the public domain, and therefore you're afraid at any moment it might collapse. So darko, you can knock it down and rebuild it from the out. Normally you don't have to just fill up a gap, knock the whole thing down and rebuild it. In order to protect people from the danger. So we're bracketing for a moment the knocking down, which is protecting them from the danger, and we're pointing to the fact that you can build it normally. So, and why? And we're assuming because it is, if it's going right by the Rishut Harabim, it's not your wheat field, it's your yard of your house. So you see we're dealing with a yard of a house, and you see that you can build it in the normal way. So the Gemara says, no. Hasam kiriktani taima b'pnei hasakana. There, the reason we let you build it normally was because we had to let you do the whole thing because of the sakana. So since we're telling you to knock it down, we're going to let you build it up normally. But if it was just a normal issue for not a sakana, but just like a breach in the wall, then even in your yard, we would not let you do it normally. We would have to do it in a more temporary way. So now the Gemara tries this from the opposite angle. The Iga de Amri, some try to sort of have started with the question. Tashma, come in here. You have a wall of your yard that's leaning into Rishut Rabim. Soter bonek darko. You knock it down and you rebuild it normally. Now, because of the sakana, so the question is sakana justifying just the knocking down or even the building up? So here the Gemara is going to start with what it ended right a minute ago. That means sakana justifies the whole thing. So Taima says sakana in, shalom sakana lo. So the whole thing is only allowed because of the sakana. Without the sakana, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't knock it down, and you couldn't build it up. Don't you see that? So you see it's only because of sakana. Let this be a contradiction of Rav Chizda, who lets you always build the wall of a yard normally. So Rav Chizda would respond to you, Hasam soser bona, hacha bona velo soter. So no. There, the sakana justification was only needed for the knocking down part. So the knocking down you had to do because of sakana, and therefore you would build it up afterwards. But if you just want to build it, there's a breach in the wall. You didn't make the breach. It just happened. And now you want to build it? That you could do the normal way if it's in your yard. The limitations of doing it not normal are in the field, but if it's in your yard, you're okay. Sakana is only needed here to justify the soter part. So now the Gemara says, Hasam soser bona, hacha bona velo soter. So the Gemara says, Hasam nami. So the Gemara asks a question that has a pretty obvious answer. Hasam nami, 1 minute. If there it's only because of sakana, lister velo livni, why does it say knock it down and build it up? Why don't we just tell the guy knock it down? Okay? Now, of course, Rav Chizda would say, okay, but you're allowed to build it up. But if you think that there's some hesitations in building it up, it's also asking, why do we give special allowance to build it up the normal way if you don't agree with Rav Chizda? So the Gemara says, Im kain mim nevelo soter. The obvious answer. If you tell the guy, you got to knock this down. It's a danger, but don't build it up yet until after Chol Moed. Nobody's going to listen to you. And even if you tell them, don't build it up unless you get, the normal way yet. So if you want him to knock it down, you got to let him build it up. But Rav Chizda, that would be if you need a special justification to build it up. But of course, Rav Chizda would say you don't need a special justification if it's a yard and it's that would give you full allowance, as opposed to if it's a field. Ravashi says, this also can be inferred from the language of our Mishnah. Diktani, our Mishnah says, by Shemitah, you can build the wall the normal way. So what are we talking about? The wall of a garden or the wall of your yard? So, where is this wall? If it's a wall of your yard, Why do you have to talk about, it's allowed to build a wall in your front yard on Shemitah? Maybe you should tell me I can drive my car on Shemitah. I could do my taxes on Shemitah. Meaning a wall in my front yard, what? Right. A wall in your front yard has absolutely nothing to do with the issues of Shemitah. It's my yard. I'm not growing anything there. So the fact that the Mishnah needs to allow it on Shvius would only make sense if it was in some agricultural context. If it was a wall around my garden. So you see that our Mishnah is talking about garden walls. Our Mishnah isn't addressing walls of yards. Okay? Now, so then what is the Chiddush even by a wall of a garden? You're not working the land. So, Elalav de Gina. It's talking about the wall of your garden. And even though it looks like you're doing it to protect the fruit, which is funny because you are using it to protect the fruit, but maybe the point is that, as I've told you before, there's an issue about like protecting the fruits as a way of demonstrating ownership. This is mine. Everybody else hands off. And there's a way of protecting the fruits, which is a problem on Shemitah. It's not just working the land. There's an idea of sort of that sense of demonstrating the fact of ownership. But there's another way of like protecting the fruits because I don't want people trampling it. I certainly don't want animals trampling it. I don't want people just walking through as a shortcut. Other ways of doing it for the sake of the fruit. So therefore, so even though it looks like that's the problem, which is funny because in a way that is what you're doing. You are doing the tirus leperi, but I would think that that is problematic. Shmamina, that it's not, that you're not working the land, number one, and number two, it's sort of like the laying of the traps. You can do things that protect the fruit, like the laying of the traps, protect the fruit, if you're not actually working the land, and therefore it's okay. But I did want to be clear that that's not. That there are ways in which you can do things that are about demonstrating I own this, which actually would be more problematic. So what we see is the Mishnah is talking about an agricultural context, a garden, and therefore we have limitations. Therefore we have to say that it's allowed on Shemitah. You might have thought not. It's blanket allowed on Shemitah. And there's a little bit of a reservation in terms of the Chol HaMoed issue about doing it in a slightly different way. But if it's your yard, then even on Chol HaMoed we allow you to build it up fully. Now why? Again, the Rashbam said because your yard, it's about protecting yourself from robbers. I mentioned the possible issue of of privacy. Take a look at Tosfos. He sort of deals with this. Tosfos says, Amar Ravashi Masnisin Amidika, Pasuk Petosos da Rav Rabbeinu Peret. So that's interesting. One Tosfos referring to another Tosfos. The Hilchos Sohachi, that we rule this way, that you can in your yard you can build it up normally. The Koter Chatzer Mutter leave no so. Upirish, but now here's what Rabbeinu Peret says. Tanu davka b'makom samach l'rishus harabim sheishlachu shliganovim. Aval bein chatzer l'chatzer mishum b'nei chatzer aser leave nos kedarko. So if it's in your yard, if it's in like a courtyard, right, and you're not exposed to random people in the street, you're only exposed to your like next door neighbors. So first of all, it's nice to live in a community where you don't have to be worried about your next door neighbors might be ganovim. Okay, but clearly, though, there could be privacy concerns. So this Rabbeinu Peret specifically points out we're only giving you an allowance because of a concern of robbers and not a concern of privacy, which is quite fascinating given that the Gemara is very sensitive to issues of privacy. So it's worth noting that at least that's the way he interpreted it. You could have said otherwise. Okay, there's a question or two? Yes.
The problem of the Natira would be if you had the perception, gave the perception that it was for commercial interests that you were protecting the fruit because you want to do business on Shvi?
Not only saying business. Shvi is you're supposed to let the fruit be mutter for everyone to come and get it, right? So if you put barbed wire around your yard and on Shemitah, even if you would not have worked the land, that is a problem of letting the fruit be free for all. So there's an issue about demonstrating protective ownership, not necessarily even that you want to sell it. Let's say I'm just going to take it all for myself, right?
So here the distinction, therefore, is despite the fact that building the wall might inhibit someone from coming and freely taking that fruit,
right?
I don't want you trampling on my lawn.
Exactly, which is okay. Right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And that does raise interesting questions. Right. How do you sort of limit the sort of access to it in order to do what you got to do as a farmer, and in order so it's not like people are randomly coming in the whole time or whatever, and at the other time not do it in a way that basically is saying this is mine, you can't touch. So that's an interesting issue around Shemitah. Okay. You leave the gate open. That's one way to do it. Well, you can have a sign that says, please ring for admittance or something. I don't know. Okay, something like that. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Let's take a look at the next Mishnah. Okay, now we move from things that are like, I don't know, yard related, although we have been transitioning a little from actually working the ground to traps and walls. Anyway, now we move to a much more broader issues around Chol Moed. Let's take a look. Rabbi Meir says, Roin es hanigaim, some have the gears of Betchila, some don't. Roin es hanigaim lahakel avalo lahachmir. If somebody has a spot on their body and they think it might be tzarat, or it's already been identified before Chol Moed as possible tzarat, and they've been put in quarantine, hesger, then the question is, can you inspect it or re-inspect it? The question of Batchila might be relevant to that. Can you inspect that spot on Chol Moed?
Well, to re-inspect, don't you have to?
Well, we'll take a look. Okay, you don't have to do it exactly a week later. It's a minimum of a week later. Yeah. Okay, so he says you can look at it. And if it's okay, then you can say, oh, you're tahor. But if it's not okay, you could say, you know what, let's talk after Chol Moed. Okay, so that's why there's somebody who does procedures. When you like at the hospital, they have like not the radiologist, they have somebody else who sort of does the X-rays or whatever, or the ultrasounds, and they're not allowed to tell you what they're actually seeing. They said the doctor will speak to you. So once in a while ago, I had somebody who said to me like. I can tell you if it's okay. So I said, so great. So if you'll tell me I can't tell you what it is, then it's like, oh, what's happening? Oh my God, what's the doctor going to say? Anyway, so it's the same type of thing. You can say, okay, you can say it's when it's okay. You can't say when it's not okay. So what? Well, we'll talk about that. So that's what we're going to talk about. So Rabbi Meir says you can look at it to be lenient, but if you're going to have to say tameh, then you don't respond. We'll talk after Chol Moed. The Chachamim and the sages say, Lo lahakev, lo lahachmir. Don't look at it all on Chol Moed. Okay? Now, why not? You might say exactly for the reason I said, that if you say, we can't talk about it now, then you're effectively telling the guy it's tummy, and even if it doesn't halachically change its status, it's still like, bad news. But let's take a look at that's not what the Gemara is going to say.
So, the second time.
All right, so the Gemara will address all of this. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Yes?
Yesterday, I thought you mentioned that Rabbi Meir was considered the sages.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. You're right. I said often. You're absolutely correct. Here you have Rabbi Meir as the first and Chachamim as the alternative voice. Right. So very often Rabbi Meir is Chachamim, especially if he's not already mentioned, and often if it's like in response to Rabbi Yehuda, but it's certainly not a rule by any way. Okay. Tanya, we taught in Brayser, Rabbi Meir Omer, Roinas and Gaim lahakel avalo lahachmir. You could see these spots in order to be lenient, but not in order to be strict. You wouldn't rule on it if it's bad. Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo lahakel avalo lahachmir. Rabbi Yossi says, no, don't look at it at all. So that now we see that he's the Chachamim. So here the reason is not because, oh my God, you're going to get him upset because he'll be able to figure it out, but no. Basically says once you're addressing the case, you got to give him an answer. So you could say, I'm not going to look at it today. Come back to the office after Chol Moed. But if you're looking at it, if you're niskaklo, you're obligated to him to look at it and to respond. Then you have to respond one way or the other. I'm a Rebbe, nearing Divrei Rebbe Meir b'musgar, v'divrei Rebbe Yossi b'muchlat. So here's going to get a little confusing, but he says we rule like Rebbe Meir and a guy that's musgar, and Rebbe Yossi and a guy that's muchlat. Now, what's the difference between musgar and muchlat? So, and also, what does he mean by nearing Divrei? But first of all, we'll take a look. Okay, so here you've got a guy. There's my guy. He's got a spot. Right here, he's got a spot on it. Okay, so anyway, so he shows it to a Kohen. So the Kohen can do one of two things. He could either say tahor. Actually, what we could do is he could say tahor, and then he's in the safe zone. Or he could say what? Well, no, the first weekend the first week. So this is the first appearance. The thing you could say is, or you could say, let's give it a week. That's your choice there. How do you draw those decision things like that, right? Isn't that on those flow charts? Okay, tahor, and he just says wait. Okay, so now he's in this waiting period. Okay, which is he's called muskar. He's giro hakohen. Okay, quarantined. He's locked up till we look at it again. Okay, he's a muskar. Okay, then comes the second time that he appears before the Kohen. Now, there's three possibilities here.
What happens to the nega?
Well, exactly, three possibilities. And I'm not going to go to all of them. One halacha is that it basically went away, so you're tahor. Okay? One possibility is it's gone. One possibility is that it's gotten bigger. Okay? It grew. And then you are completely tamei. Okay? And this is called muchlat. Okay? She'll talk about it in a minute. And then the third possibility is it stayed the same. Right? And then you appear the third time before the Kohen, and then based on what happens, either you're going to be muchlat or tahor. Okay? So anyway, at time 2 or time, after 1, this is week, it might be a little confusing. This is week 1, this is week 2. Okay? So here you're a mustar, you might do a leapfrog and become a muchlat if it grew from week 1 to week 2, but here you're basically a muskar. If it grew, and or other things happen anyway, you can become a muchlat. What is the difference? Okay, the basic difference is the Mishnah in Megillah says, "Ein bein, mitzvah muskar l'mitzvah muchlat, ella," and what it means is prima ufrima, the caring of the garments, the growing the hair wild. But basically, interestingly, the basic status during these periods, here is when you have the hair and the garments. But the basic status during all these periods is pretty much the same, which is you're fully tamei, okay, and you are. And what we're going to see is an interesting question about whether if it's a man, if he's allowed to be with his wife, okay, but he's fully tamei, he's chayav in korbanot, etc., etc. Okay, anyway, actually not. Well, whatever. Hold on, forget the part. Okay, anyway, so that's the stats. Okay, now. When are you appearing before the Kohen? So, right, whatever. So let's take a look at what he says. Amar Rava, b'tahur. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's do that again. Amar Rabbi, nirin divrei Rabbi Meir b'musgar, v'divrei Rabbi Yossi b'muchlat. Now, when he says nirin divrei Rabbi Meir, it's confusing because if you ever really paskin like Rabbi Meir, right? So the paskin like Rabbi Meir means that you're saying that you can look at it and just say nothing. So if you're willing to paskin like Rabbi Meir, you might as well paskin him in all the cases. Just look at it and just say nothing if it's a problem. So it's actually quite confusing, the language, and Tosfos has a whole discussion why there's such a big Tosfos here. But really what it means is, think about Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, not that Rabbi Meir says say nothing if it's a problem, but think about Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Meir says you look at it, and Rabbi Yossi says you don't look at it. So meaning Rabbi is basically assuming, like Rabbi Yossi, if you're going to look at it, you're going to have to give him the answer, one way or the other. He's assuming like Rabbi Yossi. You can't just give him one answer without you can't just choose which, I'm only going to give you one type of an answer. If you're going to look at it, you got to give him the answer. So when it says nirin divrei Rabbi Meir, it means we are going to look at it in this case, and we're not going to look at it in the other case. But if we're going to look at it, we're not really going to go like Rabbi Meir. If we're going to look at it, we're going to tell you one way or the other. Okay? So here's what he says. Nirin divrei Rabbi Meir b'muskar, v'divrei Rabbi Yossi b'muchlat. That if you're in this category, you'll be prepared to look at it. Okay? Whereas if you're in this category, muchlat, you're not going to be prepared to look at it. Now why? You would say if you're in the muchlat, it's like the better situation. Can't get any worse, can only get better. If you're in this category, maybe it'll get better, but maybe it'll get worse. So if anything, if you want to pick one of the times to look at it, it should be muchlat, not muskar. All right? So let's see what the Gemara says about this. The Gemara is going to circle back to that. Amar Rava, the tahor, if the guy is totally tahor, he's just seen it, he has yet to appear before Kohen, everybody agrees, meaning don't look at him. Meaning not everybody, Rabbi Meir, again, we're not dealing, we're not dealing with Rabbi Meir. We're basically dealing, again, with the assumption if you're going to look at it, you're going to give a ruling, either way. But if the guy is totally tahor, everybody would agree, don't look at it. Because if you look at it, you might have to give a ruling and make a tar person into tamei. So again, bracketing Rabbi Meir, assuming you're going to give the ruling one way or the other. If it's a tahor guy, don't look at him. Okay, behesker rishon pliki techazile. If you're in status 1, everybody would agree that you would look at it. Why? Yes, you would look at it. Why? Because what is possible will happen to me if I'm in this status and you look at it.
You're already tamei, so
I'm already tamei, so either I'm going to get better and you're going to look at it here and tell me I'm tahor, or you're going to tell me, wait another week. Well, I'm already in that status. So it's not much of a difference. So you might as well look at it. If you tell me wait before I come back to look at you, I'm still waiting around a week, right? So you might as well look at it here and maybe get me off free. In the worst case scenarios, it'll just continue into week 2. So everybody agrees that you do look at it in that case. Okay, I understand. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Key pligi, what do we debate? I mean, there's a big Tosos also that rereads it in different ways, which I'm not going to talk about because it's confusing enough after this. Key pligi, what do they debate? The Hesker Sheni, the second status. Mar Savar v'koin Tal Yamilsa, Itahor Amarle Tahor, Vitame Shosik. So if it's this case, right, so here we're saying, we are back to Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. Everybody would agree in this case, like, why even bother looking at him? Okay? He's tahor already. You don't have to make him tahor. Best thing you could do is do nothing. Everybody would agree in this case, even Rabbi Yossi, you might as well look at him and give him the ruling, because even though Rabbi Yossi feels you have to give him either ruling, but okay, the Torah ruling will be great, the Tamei ruling won't be so bad. So even Rabbi Yossi would say, why not look at him here? Okay? Here the question is, would we look at him at this case? Because at this case, you could really make him worse, or you could really make him better. So therefore, Rabbi Meir will say, look at him and only give him when it's a good ruling. And Rabbi Yossi will say, I don't want to look at him, because if I look at him, I might have to give him the bad ruling, and I'm going to make him even worse.
Making him worse?
Because you're making him from muskar to mukhla, which is like a more complete status. I mean, it's certainly the gadaf rumim, tamei yikra, even though it's the same in terms of tumah, and socially it's a big difference.
So
okay?
So that position treats the third case
Yeah.
like the first case. You can only make it worse. Right? If he's tahor, don't look at him at all.
Well, no, here it's not you can only make it worse. You could make it better. You could say tahor, but there's a chance you'll make him worse.
Okay.
Here, you might continue it for a week, but it's not really going to make it any worse than
What
it
about
already
the
is.
first case? Why not look at him at all?
Here?
You only make it worse, right?
So you don't. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi agree, don't bother looking at this guy. Okay, meaning because even if everybody would say, why bother looking? It would only make it worse. Here, Rabbi Meir will say, of course you look at him, because I'll give you a good answer. I won't give you a bad answer. Even Rabbi Yossi would look at him, because even a bad answer won't be so bad.
Right.
And there's a possibility that it'll be the best answer.
Right.
Okay, here though is where they really debate. Right, because here Rabbi Meir will always say, look at him, you can only make it better, okay? But Rabbi Yossi will say, no, here you can really make it worse, and I don't want to look at him
I'm
there.
sorry, week number 2, couldn't it have spread?
Yeah, so Tosas asked that question. So Tosas says, 1 minute, here, if it spreads, you're going to go into this category. Right, so I was a little bit afraid to give you that piece of information, because that's Tosas' question, which leads... Tosas has a totally different read of the Gemara, okay? Not totally different, but can we bracket it? If we're done with the Gemara as we have it, we can get back and address that. Tosas asked that question. Okay, yes.
The person who is in this state is in a state of increased concern.
Oh, that's such an excellent point. Right, so yes.
So you may be able to relieve him of that concern, whereas if you
Right.
maybe because you don't want to make him more concerned, he's
Right.
already concerned.
So that's an excellent point. So there's a Tosas that actually makes that issue. I'll just read you the one line where, let me just see if I can find it, where he actually talks about it. Right. Here, 4 lines down in the Tosfos on the wide lines in Zayin Amud Aleph, he says, "V'gam yafsi sheyitzta'er she'ata hayimetzapeh liyot tahor ve'ein metzapeh ata litaher." So he deals with like certain cases. And he says, look, in this case, this is part of his critique of this read of the Gemara we just did. In this case, you figure, it's only 1 week. It'll probably be fine. I'll probably be able. Then if you rule him tamei, you're not only perpetrating his status, but you're making him feel that he's stuck in his status, right? He's not like about to turn over. You're saying a different concern, which is the anxiety of not knowing one way or the other way. Right, so Tosfos actually does touch on those issues. I mean, those are very legitimate points. Tosfos touches on them. It's not explicitly addressed in the Gemara. Okay, so let's take a look. So, Betzker Sheni, Mar Savar B'Kohen Tal Yamilsa. So, Rabbi Meir says, I'm willing to look at him even in the second stage. He says, look, the Kohen completely has discretion whether to give the ruling or not. E tahor, amle tar. If he's tar, you say tar. Vitame, shasik. And if it's tame, it says, we'll talk about it later. He doesn't give an answer, and therefore you can look at him even in the case where it could be really bad because you just don't give the ruling. And without giving the ruling, the status does not obtain, right? He does not become tameh until the Kohen utters the ruling, and that's an important thing to realize about all of this. The Kohen is not just discovering a reality which is always there. The halachic status only results from the utterance of the Kohen. And therefore, by not giving the ruling, the guy does not become worse off because, at that stage. Umar Savar, but Rabbi Yossi holds, l'taharo o l'tam oksi. Yes, it's true. The uttering of the Kohen determines his status, but you cannot choose, once you're looking at him, whether you're going to give him an answer or not give him an answer. It says he appears before the Kohen, then the Kohen will be mitaher him or mitame him. So once you're looking at the guy, you got to give him an answer, one way or the other. Okay, but everybody agrees that without the Kohen saying it, nothing will happen. But the question is, can the Kohen choose not to give an answer? Okay, so that's where we are. Now, Amar Rebbe. So that's the issue about that they fundamentally, here everybody agrees, why not look at him? You won't make it really worse. Here everybody agrees, why look at him? There's no way you can make it better. And the debate is this guy. Okay, now we get to this issue about nearing Divrei Rebbe Meir. If there's a way for Rebbe to say, like, sometimes split the vote. So, not really splitting the vote, because again, Rebbe is assuming that if you're going to look at him, you're going to have to rule one way or the other. But sometimes we'll look at him, sometimes we won't. Amar Rebbe, nearing Divrei Rebbe Yossi b'muchlat, the Divrei Rebbe Meir b'musgar. Okay, we will rule that you won't look at him b'muchlat, in this guy. Now we're talking about this guy here, the guy that already is in the worst status. Okay, you won't look at him here, but you will be willing to look at him in one of these statuses. Now that is completely counterintuitive. If anybody you're going to look at, it's the guy that's already in the worst state. Can't get any worse, right? But that's his first version. Okay, let's take a look. Nearing Divrei Rebbe Yossi, we won't look at him b'muchlat, the guy that's in the full state. The Divrei Rebbe Meir b'musgar, but we'll look at him like Rebbe Meir. We'll have to give him one way or the other an answer, but we'll look at him in the guy that's in the middle state, which is counterintuitive. The Hatanya, we have a brighter that says the opposite. The opposite is what makes sense. Here, we're looking at him. He might get worse, but he might get better. I'm sorry. Here, we won't look at him, because here, there's a good chance that he'll get worse, right? Here, of course, we're going to look at him. He can only get better. Okay, that completely makes sense, all right? What should be the logic to say the opposite? So let's take a look. So the Gemara says, Tanai hi aliba de Rebbe. There's a debate about which was Rebbe's way of splitting the vote. Mar savar tzavsa de alma adifle, umar savar tzavsa de ishto adifle. The question is, would you rather have the company of your friends or the company of your wife? You don't need to answer that. Okay, so now what does that mean? It means that, it means that, again, of course, we're assuming a male Mitzorah, but a male Mitzorah is the one that the Torah says. It says, Yashav michutz lo shivat yamim. Now, does people know where it says by the Mitzorah, Yashav michutz lo shivat yamim? Once he has been looked at here, and it says you're tahor, you got a good check of health, then we're going to go through a 7-day process of tahara, 7-day tahara, right? And then in the end, you're going to have the whole birds and the whole thing that comes out, whatever, right? That's the beginning of Parshas Mitzorah. And during that 7-day process of tahara, it says, Yashav michutz lo shivat yamim. So the question is, here it's assumed to be that he can't have sex with his wife, okay? But because he has been told that he is tahor, okay, he can actually, or he's in the process of tahara, whatever, he can actually go back to the camp, okay? So in this period, no wife, or not having sex with his wife, yes, he's back in the camp, okay? In this period, okay, and by the way, in this period, okay, the answer is, well, let's say when he's here, you're assuming that here, since it's not yet, it didn't yet say this verse, even though here he's michutz lamachana,
his wife can come with him.
His wife can come with him.
Outside the camp, right?
No camp, okay, but yes, wife. Okay? So, then now the question is, will you look at this guy on Chol Moed? So you could say it can only get better. Yeah, it could get better, but in the process of getting better, it gets worse in that he has to separate from his wife. So maybe, it's so ironic, though, to think about that somebody wouldn't want to get better, even though, even if it's true. He'd rather be with his wife than be in the camp. Who doesn't want to be getting better? So anyway, but the idea that you don't look at this guy is because he'd rather not start getting better. He'd rather be with his wife, even if he has to be out of the camp. And if you're going to tell him Tohar, he's going to have to he's going to have to be without his wife, even though he goes back in the camp. So therefore, you don't look at him. As opposed to this guy, you do look at. Why do you look at this guy? Because, again, if he gets better, if at this stage he gets better, he gets totally better. Right? He doesn't have to go through this process. If at this stage he gets better, he gets totally better. And if he gets worse or stays the same, it's just all the same because in this entire period here, in this entire period, he's chutz lamachana. Muskar, the only difference with this guy is that the hair and the garments or whatever. This entire period.
But that's still, I thought we said it was a worse way.
It is worse. Yes. So now the question. In this entire period, he's chutz lamachana. Okay. So you look at him here because the chutz lamachana thing is not going to change, right? He's going to stay chutz lamachana, and the wife thing is going to stay with him. So you might as well look at him here. Here, don't look at him because then he'll start getting better and he won't be able to be with his wife. That's that logic. The other logic is the much more logical one, which is people want to be better. So therefore, in this case, you will look at him because he'll be in the process of getting better, and in this case, you won't look at him because he can get worse. Now the question is, what do you mean get worse? We've been saying get worse is that he gets socially ostracized. But you're telling me that in all these cases he's chutz lamachana. So the thing is, yes, but he's more ostracized here. Here is where the hair goes wild, the garments are rent, tamei yikra. So even though he's not just living outside the city, he's really in a state of ostracization. Okay? So that is the two ways of looking at it. Yes.
He doesn't want to get better. He just doesn't want to deal with it.
He doesn't want to deal with the process of getting better.
At that particular point.
On Cholamoid. Okay, that's a better way of making sense with it. Like, of course I want to get better, even though it means without being with my wife. But over Cholamoid, at least I want to be with my family. I want to be with my wife. Okay, that's a better way of explaining it. But yes, once you realize that in this entire period he's chutz lamachana, the worst nature of this status, maybe it's not easy for us to understand. Big deal, you tear your clothes. But it's really a point of no, it really is an expression of complete ostracization. And that's why this is the worst. Okay, so that's the debate. One says, here you might as well look at him because, it's not going to really get much worse. Here you don't look at him because during, at least as pointed out, Cholamoid, he'll have to be without his wife, even though he loses being in the camp. And the other one says, no, what are you talking about? Here, of course, you look at him because he'd rather, A, start getting better, B, be with the camp. Here, you don't look at him because he could actually, because here it could just get worse. Yes?
But Jonathan, what you just said is reflected by way of understanding the similarity between Sarat and Avelut. As you said, if someone becomes an Avel during the Moed,
right.
They stay together with their family, etc.
Right.
Right? And the Avelut doesn't kick in until after the Moed, even though they were framed personal national.
Right.
It's still correct.
That is an excellent point, and that is a theme that we're going to see repeated a lot, and thank you for bringing it up, about Avelut and Mitzorah, similar practices and similar issues. Excellent. Okay, so let's continue back in the Gemara. Okay. L'memra, says the Gemara, de muchlat mutter b'tashmi shamita? What? You're telling me when you're in that worst state, you're still allowed to be with your wife? Yes. V'atani mitana braysa, v'yashav michutz lo shivas yamim, shei asur b'tashmi shamita, forbidden in sex, but that's during the period of tahara. Ve'ein olo l'ishto, and your tent means your wife. Shenemar, again assuming the male here, lechem or lehem, shu lechem lo lechem. So v'atapo modi madi, that says from which you learn that Moshe was asur b'tashmi shamita. Exactly. How we know it's wife is in the context of the fact that before Matan Torah they had to separate from their wives. So shu v'lechem lo lechem is understood in that context. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shivas yamim, so it says for 7 days, but michutz lo shivas yamim, yisapru lo, for those 7 days he counts, yemei sipuro v'lo yemei chaluto. During the period of counting, the Tara period is when he's forbidden in his wife, but not during the period of being chalut, of being totally ostracized and being cut off. That's a period where even though he's chutz lamachana and he's in the worst state, he's still mutter to his wife. The problem with sex with his wife only begins during the Tara period. Which is the logical thing to say. He says, are you kidding me? He says, if in the process of becoming tahor, the Torah is saying you can't be with your wife. Certainly when you're tamei, you can't be with your wife, right? It's even though you're being tahor, you can't be with your wife. So that's what he says.
You said none the whole time.
So he says, right, certainly starting with chaluta. I don't know if he would say it on muskar. I don't know. But he certainly says, that here it's already also with the wife. So according to him, you would certainly look at the guy at this stage because it could only get better. Okay. Rabbi Chia says, Rabbi Chia, Danti lifnei Rabbi. I discussed this in front of Rabbi. I raised the issue. Limdatenu Rabbeinu, our master, you've taught us. Yosam lo hayalo Uziyahu eli b'mei chaluto. So that Yosam was only born to Uziyahu, and Tosfos figures out how they get this from the Psukim, during the period when he was chalut, because Uziyahu was a Mitzorah. So and therefore somehow the Gemara had a tradition, or figured out based on the verses, that his wife, that Uziyahu, although he was a Mitzorah and he was a Muchlat, a full Mitzorah, his wife conceived his son during that period. So he was having sex during that period. Amarlo, he said back to him, Avani kacha marti. So yeah, I agree, I say that, meaning yeah, I agree, you can have sex during the period of chaluta, only not during the period of tahara. Okay, what's the debate? Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Gali Rachmani be Meisi Pura, Vakosha can be Chaluta. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, the Torah tells you no sex during the period of the counting and the Tahor period. So of course, if during the period of becoming Tahor, no, it's a Kol Vakomer, the period when you're most Tamei. Umar Savar, no, mind the Gali, mind the Lo Gali. What it tells me, it tells me. What it doesn't tell me, it doesn't tell me. Okay, I'm taking a minimalist read. All of these things are somewhat, not logical. They're just whatever the Torah says. So I'll only apply this in that period.
But you could say that about any Kavachon.
Right, exactly. And Tosfos sort of asks that. Okay, so excellent point, Rabbi Dov. So if you look at the little Tosfos, my lo gali, Tosfos says yesh makshim lama ein Rabbi dorish kavachomer adam dad kavachomer me'atzmo. What do you mean? You can't just say I reject the kavachomer because I just go by the pasuk. Shema yesh shum kircha or shema mitzvah chidushu. Either he has some logical challenge, or maybe he feels, and that's what the line I was throwing out, which is the whole idea of mitzvah is not logical, meaning it's not illogical, but it's like arbitrary. And if you assume all the rules are relatively arbitrary, then you can't use logic in a system that's arbitrary. Okay, and then he goes on, and maybe he has a hint from the verse, etc. But that's an excellent point. Okay. L'meimra. Now the Gemara gets back to the other point. L'meimra de Kohen Talia Milsa. Are you telling me that it all depends on the Kohen, meaning that if the Kohen doesn't utter the words, he's not Tameh, which is clearly the assumption we've been working with according to everyone. Yes, Tanya, we turn the Brisa. Ubiyom Heraot Bo. On the day he sees the spot is shown to him. Yes. But basically, what do you mean on the day that the spot is appears to him? So Gemara says, Yesh yom she'ata roeh, v'yesh yom she'ata roeh bo. There are days that you agree to look at the spots, on the day that it's chosen to roeh, and there are days that you don't agree to the spot. So, hold on, I just want to see one thing. Okay, so the days you don't look at the spot. Mikan Amru, from here they said, Chosen shenolod bo nega, if a groom has a spot, nothing lo zayin mishta, you give him the 7 days of rejoicing, of the partying, lo ulebeso l'chsuso, not just a spot on his body, but even if it's a spot on his garments or on his house, which is a big deal, so they're tamei, so it doesn't affect him, he's still okay. No, somehow that would be considered to be a set of like anguish, and you don't look at him, you don't bother him with these things for the whole week. Okay, and similarly on a yantiv, nothing lo shivas yimei regel. If somebody has a spot, you don't deal with it for the whole regel. You don't look at it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Omer. Now, so Rabbi Yehuda here says you don't look at it, and it's interesting. According to him, it's not just you don't look at it because you don't want to make it worse. You don't look at it because you don't want to have the guy deal with it for the entire during that period. Okay, and so that's the position that there are days that you can choose not to see, and that presumably if we're choosing not to see, it doesn't mean he's tamei but he doesn't know about it. It's also the idea that the Kohen's utterance will determine whether or not he's tamei. So the Kohen Talia Milsa might mean that the Kohen gets to choose, or whatever, the Kohen has the right under certain circumstances not to look at it, but also by not looking at it, the guy's status has not yet changed. Okay. Rebbe Omer, Einu Tzarich, you don't need to learn it out from the verse, Ubiyom Heiraot Bo. I can give you this idea from another verse that you can use your discretion whether or not to look at something.
Oh, he agrees with the position, but not with the derivation.
Exactly. Harei Omer, the verse says, V'tzivah HaKohen Ufinu Esabayis, that when somebody has a spot on the house, he calls the Kohen, and the Kohen clears out the house. This is explicit in the verse, so that there's nothing in the house when the Kohen declares it tamei. The stuff inside of the house, the stuff inside of the house won't become tamei. So therefore, what do you see? You see that you can wait. Let's say it's going to take a day to clear the stuff out. You see, you can wait in order to look at something, in order so that your ruling will not be an undue burden. Okay, so Rebbe says if you can do it there, where the only issue is just like a dvar harashus, it's not like I'm engaging in a mitzvah or something. It's just, it's just like, it's inconvenient. And even so, we allow ourselves to wait. Certainly, you can allow yourself to wait in cases where the guy's really engaged in a mitzvah, simcha v'regel, simcha v'nisuin. How much more so can the Kohen choose to wait rather than to see it?
You also see nicely from that the Tuma is contingent upon the Kohen.
Exactly. Excellent point. Exactly.
Yesterday, so it's common.
Exactly. That is an excellent proof from the verse that the Tuma is created by the utterance of the Kohen. Because if the Tuma was already there, then how would it matter whether he uttered it before or after? So excellent. So the Gemara says, okay, if you wait for him for a matter of discretion that he's involved in, meaning it's an inconvenience, but it's not like it's a mitzvah that it would compromise. How much more so would you postpone looking at it if it would compromise a mitzvah? Simchas of regel, simcha of denisuin. Yes, by touching it. My beinayu, what's the difference between them? Like, okay, he quoted a different pasuk. Who cares? So Amar by Mashmos Dershemika beinayu. Yeah, the only difference about how you derive it, there's no difference in law. Rava says no. Dvar reshus ika beinayu. No, there is a difference because Rebbe is learning it from a pasuk about areas that are not mitzvahs, areas that are discretionary areas. So let's say it's not the case about clearing out the house, and it's not the case that the guy's involved in regel or getting married, but the person just says, "Look, buddy Kohen, I'm in the middle of an important business deal here. I got it, whatever. Can we do this a week from now? Let me fit you into my schedule." Okay, so would that be allowed? Okay, so Rebbe would say, well, why not? You learn from the case of the house that you can use your discretion, and if it's too big of an inconvenience, you can wait for a later time to see it. Whereas the other drasha learns it from Biyom Hiraot Bo and sees it like there are special days that you don't see, and limits it to cases of like mitzvah, like regel and married, and does not give the Kohen wide discretion in terms of when to see. Yes?
Just as a matter of process, I don't know. Who summons the Kohen to look at
So that's a good question, right. So I've actually written about this. The language in the Psukim very much is V'huva el HaKohen, he's brought. And, if you look at the whole language in the Parsha of Metzora, it's very much that the Metzora is completely in the passive and he's being brought by other people. Anyway, so I've written about that, about, how that's like reflective of the reality of like, the medical profession and illness, and that you're sort of made as an object, and you lose your autonomy in those cases. But the Torah says he's brought, but the rabbis understand. So anyway, like why can I just decide never to go to the Kohen?
Brought by the owner or by the neighbors?
Well, no, it might be the person himself, not just the house or whatever. The person is brought. So anyway, the rabbis do more put in issues of autonomy and self-direction, and also like seeing the person as a subject, not as an object. One of the ways actually that I make the point is exactly this point, that we will acknowledge that you're involved in a wedding, you're involved in the regel or whatever, we acknowledge your human reality, we don't just completely, so we actually see you as a person. But in terms of the issue of coming to the Kohen, they also learned that there's an obligation to present yourself to the Kohen. But in understanding that there is that obligation, they've also made you more of an agent. Right, you're not just being controlled by others.
But even then, you have to do it outdoors, so it's not like you're going to the Kohen's apartment in his house, because you have to see, right? Because you have to make sure there's natural light.
Yeah.
Qualification.
Okay, so
no,
all
I'm
right.
saying so. There's still like you're not totally fast to the Kohen, because he has to also go out to.
Yeah, but that doesn't just to define who's controlling it. Okay, so the Gemara says V'rava Amar Dvar B'Shus Ika Benayu. The question is choosing to postpone it for a matter of discretion, not because of like a mitzvah of the regel or the nisuin. Okay, and therefore, if Rebbe is learning it out from the pasuk of cleaning the house, Rebbe would give the Kohen a wide range of discretion when to see it. Rabbi Yehuda, there's the Gemara Mehasam Lo Garmina. No. You can't learn out from the postponing by the house to apply to cases of postponing when it's on your body. Why? The chidushu, the whole case of the house is a chiddush. You could say the whole case of mitzvah is a chiddush, but the house in particular. Why? Top of Ched Aleph. The ha eitzim v'avanim ba'alma lo metamu. I mean, you're talking about the wood and the bricks of the house. Normally, that type of raw material is not tamei. Things only if they're a vessel are tamei. Wood, a stone is tamei. The whole case is completely doesn't fit any normal categories. So if the Torah wants to give some discretion there, fine. It doesn't mean you have the same discretion when it's a tumah on the body. Okay?
Something fundamental I don't get about.
Here it's tamei. Yeah.
In other words, the house itself is a vessel.
First of all, it's not. It's built on the ground, and something that's mechuber l'karka isn't tamei. So, and number two is even after you destroy it, the stones retain their tumah. You would never have something like that in normal halachas. Okay, so the whole thing is so yes, you have discretion by the house, but the house is a chiddush. You don't have the same discretion when it's on the body. Rabbi Amar, Rabbi would say back to you, Itztra. I got it from the pasuk that you have the discretion by the house, and I still use the pasuk of ubiyom heiraot bo. How do you do that? The ikasav rachmanu ubiyom heiraot bo. If you just had that verse you are starting with, some days you see, some days you don't, tell you to exclude cases of mitzvah. Havi amina lidvar mitzvah in lidvar rishos lo. I would have come to your conclusion that it's Rabbi Yehuda's conclusion that it's only the exception is when he's involved in a mitzvah. Kasav rachmana v'tziva kohen. So that's why I get from the other verse that the Kohen commands and they clear out the house to show you even for a dvar rishus you can postpone looking at it. But if it had said if it had just said that, I would have said okay, you have discretion by the house, not for reasons you said that the whole thing is a chiddush, but just because it's not so weighty, it's not your own body, so maybe there's more discretion. But if it's on your body, maybe there it's something more serious, and you have to see it, and you don't have the same discretion. Sricha, so it needed to say both. But Tosfos says by saying both, we don't just say, okay, for your body, what would Rabbi Yehuda say? For your house, you don't have to look at it even for a wide range of discretion, even for dvar rishus, even for things that the guy is not doing a mitzvah. For the body, the only exception is when the guy is doing a mitzvah. That's what Rabbi would say. What's Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi says, no, you combine the two. From the case of the house, you see you have general discretion. And from the case of the body, you see that discretion applies even to the body. So you combine the two, and therefore, even when it's a case of tumah on the body, the Kohen can say, even if the guy isn't doing a mitzvah and isn't in the middle of like regel and wedding, he can choose to wait to look at it for a time that makes more sense, that's more sympathetic to the person and his circumstances. Okay, so we will pick up with this tomorrow.
So we have a scenario where the Kohen tells the guy he's